From VHS to DVD to Blu-ray to YouTube, what's next? Let's find out. We have a special forum all about just that, the changing faces of distribution, here at the 2013 Florida Film Festival with me, Esty, and of course, Orlando Live.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to introduce our panel and start off with some questions for them, and we'd like to make this as interactive as possible, so please, if you have questions throughout the discussion, just put up your hand and we'll certainly try to get to everybody. I have to my left John Von Thayden, the Manager of Acquisitions from Magnolia Pictures. Next to him is Amanda LeBeau from Oscilloscope, and she is the VP of Digital and Ancillary Sales. Dylan Marchetti, the founder and president of Variance Films. And on the end, we have Ed Ahrens, the co-founder and managing director of Music Box Films. And Ed also actually is a double threat. He's an exhibitor in his free time representing the Cinema Village in Manhattan, a long-standing New York institution. So he might have some insight on both ends of the business and how things work. So I guess I'm going to start with you, John, since you're sitting right next to me.
Okay.
And we're going to try to cover a range of topics pertaining to the changing face and landscape of exhibition and distribution, since it is very rapidly morphing before us. John, you work for a company that has two distinct labels now, Magnolia Pictures and Magnet, and within that organizational structure, a number of different approaches to the distribution of your films, ranging from pure theatrical releases, films that are out on video on demand simultaneous with the theatrical release, and what we know as, quote, ultra VOD, where a film goes out on demand prior to the theatrical release. So could you talk a little bit about what it is that you do in an acquisitions capacity, and how, when you're looking for films, you're trying to size up both label and perhaps the release to whatever extent you get involved in that decision-making process?
Sure. Just to start with the definition of the labels, it's the same staff. It's a small independent company. It's more on a marketing side, whereas putting the logo in front of the film, being a Magnolia film or the Magnet films tend to be more in the horror genre, more extreme comedies like Tim and Eric's $1 Billion Movie, things like that. And there is an internet presence that follows, sort of that as a curated label. So that really helps with the marketing, but as far as the day-to-day work, we acquire films for both labels, and the marketing people work on all those films. To answer the question about getting into how we release the films, it's really a film-by-film basis. What's going to be the best for this particular film? As a distributor that does 35 to 40 films a year, there's no one-size-fits-all way to distribute our films, and being, ranging from those horror movies to, foreign and independent films. They have different audiences, and those audiences go to and consume their films and pay for their films in different ways. The people that might go to the theater to see a documentary like Queen of Versailles we did last year is not going to be the same people that might watch a horror movie on their couch on VOD at 3 in the morning. So it really comes back to each particular film looking at how it's going to be the best for that movie is the short answer.
And are you finding that a particular type of film is most effectively released in a given way? I mean, do you designate things?
I mean, I think that the documentary and foreign theatrical crowd is still a vibrant theatrical business. The traditional platform release of opening major cities and moving on. It's not the way we do every independent or smaller film or specialty film. The way the business used to run. The VOD has now taken a chunk of that. There's an appropriate way to release films that I think a lot of it is you love coming out to the movies, but there's a movie you want to see and you don't get to the theater. And the businesses don't really cannibalize each other. I know I'm jumping ahead now, in that you're still going to go to the theater if you want a night out, but there might be a movie you want to see that you don't can't get out of the house for whatever reason, and it's there and it's available for you. And as a company, we're fairly agnostic on how you want to watch the movie as long as you can get it.
Your company is also in a very unique position as compared to many because it is a truly vertically integrated company. There are other components that fall under the Mark Cuban umbrella, if you will, starting with the Landmark Theater chain, going to his television components. How has that helped along the Magnolia piece of the business model?
I mean, they're sister companies. It's not, it's not like they're separate businesses, and they run their businesses their own way. Our VOD program has had a component where there has been the film is shown once promotionally on HDNet, which is now Access, and so it has worked out that there's a certain relationships and what makes sense for each company, to what's best for them. But that's.
And last for you, Magnolia really was one of the forerunners in the industry, not only in setting up a specialty sub-label that focused on genre films with Magnet, but the video-on-demand day-date business. It has since been emulated and copied by many other companies. Has that become, for you as an acquisitions person, a much greater challenge as you're out on the front trying to secure titles for your company?
Sure. More companies means there's more competition for films, changes the prices and things. And yeah, there's definitely more people in the space than there were, 3, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. I think the first film we did this was like 2007. So it's been a steady, move up. And it's good news when there's more distributors to a certain extent.
Thank you. Moving over to Amanda. You work for a very wonderful boutique distribution company called Oscilloscope. And it's my understanding that you have a very niche role there in handling the ancillary markets, which have become perhaps as important, or depending on the business model, more important than the theatrical release of a film. Could you speak a little bit to the different platforms that you work with and handle to get your company's movies out there, and how the back end, if you will, is working these days to make the acquisition of a film viable for a boutique distribution company?
Sure. We have direct relationships with a slew of platforms, I don't know if you know what this means, but it's quite simple, places where you can watch a film. So your Xbox, your PlayStation, Hulu, Netflix, iTunes, Vudu, which is Walmart's service, Amazon, basically any place that you've seen has capability to stream a film, or television, but in our case, film. That said, we have relationships and we deal directly with all of these places, and you can search for our films, and does that answer the question?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Are there any particular challenges with respect to contracts demanding product exclusivity on any of those platforms?
No, all of those places are non-exclusive. Some have more kind of priority in terms of which we need to price our films around, that being iTunes. But we have, all of those places are important to us. It really depends on what kind of film we'll perform. Some people will watch movies on Xbox, that sort of male skewing group, versus people who want to go to Hulu and watch films that way. So we would like to have access across all platforms. We just started a relationship with Nook, which is a Barnes & Noble's device that you can watch films, and Fandor, which is another service. There are just tons of these places. So we like to be as fair as possible, given our films that we take on are so broad. They're all in the indie spectrum of movies, but they're of all different subject matters.
Do these companies find you, or is it your responsibility to find them as new companies come into the fold?
It's very mixed. I've been kind of taking the bull by the horns and finding as many new places as possible, especially since I am a Hulu user, and I think it's such a great site, and it's very simple and easy, and it's become so popular. So that's been a really fun kind of new way to see how well some of our films can do.
And does Oscilloscope find that there's a particular platform that has been most effective and most utilized by consumers and end users?
I think it just goes back to what I said before. I mean, it really depends on the title. Some of our, more like Bellflower, for example, has performed better on places like PlayStation and Xbox versus something like, our newest movie, It's a Disaster, which is performing well on easier accessible platforms like a Hulu well, it's not on Hulu yet, but like an iTunes or Amazon.
Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah, no problem.
Moving on to our next panelist, Dylan Marchetti. Dylan, you started your own company in the wake of the demise of the former organization that you worked for that was a more formal distribution company, Think Film, to start Variance Films. And I know that it functions in a hybrid fashion. You acquire certain films for theatrical release, and you also sometimes work closely with filmmakers on self-distribution deals. Could you speak to the audience a little bit about how those two different paths work, especially the self-distribution model, since that seems to be becoming an increasingly popular avenue for filmmakers to pursue who don't find the traditional acquisitions approach to be palatable for them?
Absolutely. I mean, the one thing that's in common, even when we're working with a third party to acquire the rights to a film, is we're a company, we only do theatrical. We don't do VOD, we don't do DVD, we don't do international. But all of our films are going to have that, so we're always setting filmmakers up with different partners, whether it's an aggregator, which is basically a company that collects films and sells them to VOD, or we work with, a video company who doesn't have their own in-house theatrical to do it, or we do it directly with the filmmakers. The one thing that's in common is we're working directly with the filmmakers on all the films. So where Variance would come into play is a film, whether it be a smaller film that had a good festival run and it has an audience out there, but either it's not large enough to warrant a bigger release, like from someone like a Magnolia or an Oscilloscope, or the offers that came in, there's just not enough money for them and they think they can do a better job on their own. Or it's a situation where it's a filmmaker like a Spike Lee or a John Sayles or a Dave Grohl who is like, look, I want to control this, I want to do it myself, but I want to do it with a partner. That's sort of our sweet spot. So what's in common on all of them is, from the bat, they're all going to be a different strategies. You cannot distribute a Spike Lee film like you would, a Dave Grohl documentary. It's all sort of starting from scratch. So we try to be really, really flexible in what we do with each film, and we try to do new things, and sometimes it works, and every now and then we get into trouble and it doesn't. But because we're not really beholden to anybody except for the filmmaker, we can make a run at it.
And when you see a particular film that you like and there's a mutual interest on the receiving end as well from the filmmaker or producer, how do you decide to position which route you're going to take, whether it's to acquire the film or work with the filmmakers? Is that a mutually determined process, or is that something that they really decide for you? Can you speak a little to that part?
I mean, it's always a situation where we only lease the rights for a theatrical. Like when we're done with the theatrical, we're working as their agent, we give them back. So it's the same way, Dave Grohl makes a Foo Fighters record. He leases it to the record company to put it out, but he gets the masters back after 2 years. So generally it's dictated by the financial needs of the film and the structure of how they want to do a deal. So when we acquire a film, generally it's, we do it in conjunction with a third party, whether it's a VOD aggregator who's going to put up the money for the theatrical in lieu of a minimum guarantee, or it's a video company who just, we want to buy it, but we don't want to do a theatrical, or we don't have a theatrical department, so we'd like to bring you on to do it. And then I sort of take over with the filmmakers while they do their, VOD goodies. But it very much depends on the film and what the film needs financially to make it viable.
So do you really allow, in some instances, the filmmakers to guide the process as far as the budgeting is concerned, the decision-makings in the distribution? I would imagine that can sometimes be a challenging balance between what you, as a distributor, think is right for a movie and perhaps what a filmmaker might envision as being the proper approach.
I mean, that's something we have to, because of the way we work, it's something we have to do up front before we agree to take on a film. I mean, if a filmmaker has an idea for a film, we want to hear it because a filmmaker is going to know their film better than I ever will. They're going to have lived with it longer. But in turn, I know the distribution space better than a filmmaker is going to, unless the filmmaker happened to be a distributor at some point. So there has to be a mutual understanding that, we're going to, work with you, but we're not just going to follow orders. And if you tell me I want the film in 200 screens and it's a film that should not be opening that way, we're not going to get to that point because we're not going to take on the film. There has to be a mutual agreement. Now, depending on who you're working with, sometimes people are just like, I don't know what I'm doing, please guide us. Or you're working with someone like, like a Spike Lee who's like, I know exactly what I want to do. Give me a reason why I shouldn't do it or we're going to do it. You just have to be the guy that comes up with like, okay, this doesn't work and here's why, as opposed to just saying, no, this is stupid, we're not going to do it.
One last piece I want to go back to, person you mentioned, Dave Grohl. You recently put out Sound City, and that was exemplary of yet another particular approach to distribution that seems to be coming into vogue, especially with music documentaries and music-related films, and that's building the release of the movie around a one-day event type of screening, which then subsequently, when successful, splinters off into additional screenings thereafter based on demand and popularity. Can you speak a little to that model?
Yeah, I mean, the understanding with Sound City from the beginning was, Dave Grohl has a huge fan base, and so this makes it a little bit of an outlier as far as a typical independent film, because Dave Grohl sold $250 million worth of records over the last 25 years and has, obviously, a worldwide fan base. So the idea was a worldwide release on February 1st. Now, a couple of reasons for doing, we did a one-night screening in about 60 theaters, and we went on to do, kind of a regular theatrical. We played in New York for 5 weeks, LA for 7. And I will say that, 75% of the theatrical box office has come from the extended run, not the one-night thing, because, when you have that much buzz on a film, it's a good film, which helps. It's not just for fans of Dave Grohl. There's 50 musicians, and it's a film that actually stands on its own. There's also a day-and-date VOD component to it. So in order to qualify it for an Academy Award, you have to play basically 2 screenings before it's available on video on demand is sort of the short version of the rules. We decided, well, let's just do a bunch of them the night before. We actually got in trouble with the VOD guys who were doing it, who are like, oh, it's day and date, and you're doing it the day before the date. And, we were able to finesse it because it's a big movie. If it's a small movie, you can't break the rules like that sometimes. So, I think for any film we do, we want to make an event out of what's happening at the theater, and when you have a situation where you can get the country talking about something all at the same time, you entertain that. And music docs are a great example because there's a fan base to start with. Issue docs are another thing sometimes. People are interested in this, they all want to talk about it together on the internet, which is global, it's worldwide, and it's not tied to a geographical run in New York City, like everyone wants to talk about it at once. It's part of the great abundance, as I call it. Like, there's plenty of stuff to do, and if we can get your attention early, as we go on through a 4-month theatrical, we've got a base of people who have already seen it, who have said great things about it, and we can take it from there. It's not right for every film, but on this one, I think it's a good model.
Thank you, Dylan. Moving on to Ed Aarons, Music Box Films. Ed, your company is one of many on the independent side of the business that has a very direct specialization, I would say, in foreign language American independent films, and has really just come blazing out of the gates with some amazing success stories. Tell No One, the Dragon Tattoo trilogy, Potiche, and many other traditional films that through word of mouth have built an audience and slowly found footing in various marketplaces, including a film that we're showing here in the film festival, Laura, which is now making the rounds. Could you speak a little bit to how things came to fruition in such a formidable way for Music Box Films, and what you're doing out on the festival circuit to find this right balance of movies for your company?
So you want the origin story?
Why not? Let's start at the beginning.
Okay. How far back? No, we won't go. We won't go all the way back.
Okay, fair enough.
Music Box Films was founded in 2008. As Adam mentioned, I'm an exhibitor as well, and have been the booking agent for a Manhattan theater called Cinema Village since like '93. Maybe in the late 90s, I started getting involved in picking up rights to films, simply because I couldn't get the quality films that I wanted from the existing distributors at the Cinema Village location, in part. So I was like many distributors of art house films over the decades have started as an exhibitor. There's plenty of good examples. New Yorker Films, for example, is an excellent example. But it's pretty common throughout, the UK and France. There's many examples, and it just seems like a natural outgrowth. And so had some experience with distribution dating back in that period. Started a company called Empire Pictures and had a run for about 5 years. And then an exhibitor in Chicago who owned and operated the Music Box Theater, which is a 1927 era atmospheric movie palace on the north side, fairly close to Wrigley Field. He was looking to expand his business, explored maybe buying some additional theaters, and that didn't seem that interesting. So he arrived at the idea of becoming a distributor, an art house distributor, and his booker and I were friends, and so that's how the connection was made. I did my best to discourage him and suggest that this was a hideous business and fraught with failure, and the history of art house distributors is just littered with roadkill. But he decided to proceed, and I had a few films that I had been following that didn't have a distributor for some reason, and one of them was a favorite of mine. It's called OSS 117, which is, for those who can understand my version of French, means OSS 117, and it featured an actor named Jean Dujardin playing a very silly French spy, and he was sent to the Middle East to straighten things out, and of course his response was, "No problem." And set in the 50s, amusing film. I'm not sure it played at the Enzian, but it found some popularity. Anyway, Jean Dujardin later went on with the same director and the same co-star to make a movie called The Artist. So we like to say we discovered Jean Dujardin. That was our second release. Our third release, all in the span of about 3 months, was Tell No One, which inexplicably had been overlooked by many of the existing distributors, partially because of the reluctance to sell the rights on the part of the producer and sales agent. They were envisioning a U.S. remake, and in any event, we were sort of like the last suitor to the very pretty girl. And this movie was based on a novel that writer by the name of Harlan Coben. Harlan, with Tell No One, began a string of bestsellers. So he had a real following, and that film ended up grossing about $6.5 million. This was the summer of 2008, and the economic crisis was, oddly enough, being felt in the independent world, maybe before it was really being reported on too widely. A number of distributors collapsed, sometimes more linked to their studio overlords, Warner Independent and several others, and there was this larger crisis in funding, and I think that was clearly related to the seismic events that were later to hit in a much bigger and more public way. But so we were like a success story. In any event, we went on with traditional art house films. 2 years later, we stumbled upon something called The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which was also based on a book, and lots of people were reading it, and we sort of hitched our little wagon to the book phenomenon, the publishing phenomenon, and it ended up between the original Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and the 2 subsequent films ended up doing in excess of $20 million in the box office, which is even reasonably big deal for a Hollywood film, depending on how small scale it is. So since then, we've continued to do what we started out to do.
Ed, how do the successes either help or hinder your company? Have you experienced from the initial successes a greater level of access or ability to be a party at the table early on in negotiating processes? Or conversely, have you found that by circling a movie, other companies may also subsequently more aggressively also go after it now that Music Box is firmly established and on the map?
I'd like to think that Sony Classics now follows us
Sure.
when we go into a screening room, but no, it doesn't happen that way.
No.
There was an expectation after Dragon Tattoo that we would show up at the next Sundance Film Festival and just start throwing money around. And I sort of wanted to do that, but not ever having that opportunity. My partner, on the other hand, is a much more experienced and sober-minded business person, and so we refrained from that and kind of stuck to our game plan. And what we have been forced to do, not forced, but we wanted to do it, was something called pre-buying, which is very dicey because it basically you're acquiring a film based on a screenplay and the reputation of the director. Oftentimes there's no footage. You're just taking a chance. Laura, for example, was our first pre-buy, and so far it's worked out pretty well. But we had a script we really thought was solid. We had a director whose previous film was pretty good. Kate Shortland's Somersault, not widely seen. Magnolia released it a few years back. And it was a cast of unknown German child actors, which really should have given us pause. But it turned out okay, and it's pretty much the film we hoped it was going to be. But and since then, we've done a couple of others yet to be revealed to us. We haven't seen them yet, so we hope they'll turn out. And that was a little bit in reaction to the fact that there's a lot of new players since we got involved. I think our success was like, oh, those idiots can do it. We can certainly do it as well. Also, companies like the Weinstein Company, which was a little bit off its game, came kind of roaring back with French language in particular. They threw down $1 million to take the artist off the table, and did something similar with Intouchables, and so now French producers think all their movies are worth $1 million for the U.S., which not the case. There's a little company called Cohen Media Group, which is owned by a very, very wealthy real estate investor who's quite a movie buff and has been buying movies up like baseball cards. So that has changed the French situation a little bit, but yeah.
How about the VOD component? From the time that your company began to now, that's really proliferated in the marketplace. What's Music Box's take on that, and are you doing anything in response to the growing popularity of VOD?
Well, we have been fairly traditional with the long-standing windows, and that transactional VOD, which is the cable on demand, iTunes, etc. We simply have linked that to the DVD date, and then Netflix, the Netflix streaming, is effectively our television deal. It's like a pay TV deal. And I think it's worth noting that before Netflix came along, independent distributors rarely had television output deals, and that's really changed the landscape quite a bit. That Netflix streaming is effectively like pay TV. Obviously the viewing experience is different; it's not linear, but so Netflix comes in. Essentially, it's 3 months of theatrical, and then DVD and VOD, and then 2 months after that, it's Netflix streaming. That's pretty much the model. We have done some day and date. We had this huge budget French action film, this sort of would-be franchise thing called, was based on a French graphic novel. But it was a really good action film. And it was called Largo Winch, a title that meant nothing because nobody knows the graphic novel in the US, but we retitled it The Heir Apparent. I won't get into the plot details, but Kristen Scott Thomas has a small role as a villainess, and it's mostly in English, some French, and some Serbo-Croatian. That one we did go day and date with, and it turned out to be pretty successful. But again, I think the general consensus is for day and date, you need a genre, or you need a name actor, or two or three. But in the cable VOD interface, which is not highly detailed, unlike iTunes, you've got the title and then you have two actor names, and that's often the only thing that people have to go on. So, for example, Magnolia had a very successful Ultra DVD release of Melancholia. I think for most people, though, who saw that film, it was a Kirsten Dunst movie as opposed to a Lars von Trier film. The theatrical audience might have been more.
Theatrical
do you want to comment on that?
I think theatrical knows it's Lars, and VOD was probably exactly.
Yeah.
It was so because that film was successful on both platforms.
Exactly. That was a sort of a dream sort of scenario. So yeah, the day and date VOD requires a certain kind of film. I mean, we just wouldn't feel comfortable opening, let's say, Monsieur Lazare, day and date. I mean, I think it needs to have a little, exposure, and needs to generate all these reviews, to be a meaningful VOD title down the road.
Right, and I do remember back to that movie in particular, in contrast to the way the window is truncated so frequently now. It's a classic example of an old-fashioned foreign language film that takes time to build traction and find itself in the marketplace. And months after you launched that in its preliminary releases, it was still playing in theaters. And that's something I think many people lose sight of nowadays, that there is this trickle-out effect that can still work effectively for a theatrical release.
It's I guess you could call it the Sony Classic model, but
right.
It was the Orion Classic model before that. It was the model that went back to the 50s and before. I mean, that was how you released a foreign language film. New York, L.A., good reviews, decent grosses, and then the rest of the country picks up on it.
Right.
Obviously, that model has been compromised in various ways. These were classically review-driven films, but if you don't have a local reviewer, and if nobody's reading the newspaper, it's a concern. Luckily, the older demographic tends to still be reading print newspapers, or at least more so than younger people. And the reviews, there might be less reviewers, but it used to be that, hey, once you threw that paper, that review was gone. Now those reviews all live on, and people can go to Rotten Tomatoes and see this, see what the critical consensus is. And there's also tons more places to see trailers. Trailers used to be just in movie theaters. Now, they're all over the internet, and so a trailer becomes really, really much more valuable.
I think at this time we're going to take it out to the audience for questions. So for any of the panelists here, if you have a question, somebody right here in the front. Yes?
I have a question. First of all, sorry for reading in front of you, but we're on our lunch break, so we have to do it. There are features that fulfill the
I'll repeat the question so that everyone can hear it afterwards.
I teach media distribution in my class.
Oh, hi. There we go.
And I have tons of questions, but the most important question that I want to ask you, I'm going to actually take back to my students, and that is, and I haven't been able to find out the answer, otherwise I would have known by now. What is the typical deal that Netflix and Hulu make for an independent film? A low-budget film, no stars, but a good film, good quality. What is the type of deal that they would offer a filmmaker? Like a licensing deal. How much money are we talking about? I heard some places.
I'm not at liberty to discuss the
Oh, come
these
on.
proprietary details.
Don't tell
No.
anybody.
There's cameras
I
everywhere.
will say is our deal with Netflix, which we feel is kind of an endorsement of our business model. The more the box office, i.e., the more successful we've been getting it seen in art theaters across the country, the more the licensing fee.
Okay. So you really have to have that theatrical release then in order to get any kind of a worthwhile deal with either one of them?
Well, it starts pretty low.
I heard $20,000.
$20,000 in box office?
No, for a licensing fee from Netflix. That's what the average is for an indie film.
Yeah, I don't think we would take that little, but it's very difficult if you're just like an independent filmmaker. You've made a feature. It's played at festivals. Maybe you've opened it in a couple places. To just go to Netflix because there's very few people at Netflix having to make these decisions. So they rely on distributors as kind of a curatorial force. So that filmmaker would be better off going directly to somebody like Dylan, if I understand.
What about Distribber?
The stripper?
Uh-huh.
Distributors and aggregators, so they're
And
there's
they
several of
aggregate
these.
to Netflix and Hulu.
Basically, what the role of an aggregator is in general is, let's say there's 5 people at Netflix who's buying films. There may not be actually that many more than that. They just simply don't want to take calls all day from independent filmmakers who've made films they've never heard of, a lot of times with
Right.
no cast. But some of these films are worthy. So what the aggregator's role is you as a filmmaker take your film to these aggregators and say, hey, I made this film. Some of them will take anything you give them. Some of them will charge you a fee. Some of them will say, well, let's look at the film and figure out what your plan is to do it. And then their job is to put them all in a big pile, walk over to not only Netflix, but cable VOD, iTunes, Vudu, Hulu, all those guys, and present them and say, hey, we have an agreement. Can you either just put these up, or can you pay a licensing deal? It's not particularly easy, and I actually have this conversation a lot with filmmakers. If you're not going to do anything to get people aware of your film, whether that be, I think personally, I think a theatrical release is one of the best tools for that as far as marketing. It's really hard to get anyone to give you money for a film if you're just saying, okay, this film exists, here you go. Now can I have some money? That is tough.
Right.
I think it's important to note that there is a very distinct difference between a Hulu and a Netflix, though. Not independent films typically would not go up on Hulu right away,
Right.
and they don't typically give a license fee. Netflix is considered, I guess, a TV window now. I agree with that completely. But
So
Hulu
what
is
is
not.
how do they share profit with Hulu then?
They don't.
They don't share it. So
What do
you
you
just
mean?
put your content on Hulu and they don't share any money?
Oh yes, I thought you meant Hulu and Netflix sharing.
Yeah.
No, you get a percentage
Of the
of
advertising?
exactly.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Did not know that.
But it depends. I mean, it also depends on what you're giving. If you're giving them something that they may, it depends.
We're all about real world education at Full Sail, so I try to keep it real with my students. So I don't want to mislead them to think that you're going to go out and it's going to be so easy. I tell them it's going to be very, very hard. You're risking a lot of money, and you're causing other people to risk a lot of money too. So one thing I do like what you were talking about, the video on demand. I like that model where you release it just a couple of weeks before the theatrical release and then pull it from video on demand. I think it's a great way to build buzz. But I teach 20-year-olds. So it's really different how the way they go to movies than the way somebody my age goes to a movie and how I discover a movie. So anyway, thanks for coming, you guys.
How do you discover a movie?
Excuse me?
How do you discover movies? Just out of curiosity.
Well, how do I discover them at my age? I read Hollywood Reporter. I read Deadline.com. I read what you guys read.
Okay.
So, but my students, they read Facebook. They read what their friends talk about. That's what they want to go see. Also, they don't spend money to go see a movie unless it's a big budget production movie with special effects and big stars, and they know all their friends are going to go want to see it too.
That's sort of one of the a little bit disappointing aspects of trying to market films to independent films to younger audiences. They're extremely conservative in their media preferences, unlike in music where they are very comfortable going very far afield to find stuff. Motion pictures, a little different, and it's really a concern in the indie sector.
So thank you.
Yes, the gentleman in the middle over here with his hand up. Yes.
I have a question for all of you. The distribution process in general is very daunting, especially for first-time filmmakers. Could you kind of, if you can, talk a little bit about what a first-time filmmaker that perhaps has a film or a documentary film in a festival like this, what to expect? Like, in other words, so the movie's going to be screened. You're going to have representatives, I'm assuming, there at these festivals, at a lot of festivals or certain festivals. What should they expect as far as talking with you and meeting with you, or are you going to approach them, or what should they have ready? Should they have their own distribution plan ready? How does that work?
My first suggestion to you is to try to find an agent that will represent your film. It's much easier for us to go directly to someone that we know, even though I'm sure you're a lovely person, and you all may disagree with me, but I'd rather go to someone that has a perspective of what your film is. And so I think that if you can find a producer's rep or an agent, go for it. There's so many different options in New York and Los Angeles, and I don't know where you're based, but probably in your hometown. So that's the first thing I would do. And then, of course, always feel free to come and talk to us, but I think it's easier. It's a very fine line.
I mean, I'll say, even as someone who only works with filmmakers, when I go to a film festival like a South by or a Sundance, I'm watching 4 or 5 movies a day, then I'm meeting with a ton of people who I already know, so it's really hard for me to just and frankly, it's discouraged me to just walk up to a filmmaker, because most filmmakers do have a sales representative, and it's sort of not the etiquette for me to walk around William Morris or Endeavor or CAA and go to the filmmaker and say, hey, I love your film, come talk to me later. But the one thing you can do as a practical matter before you get to the sales agent stage is be very careful about what you reveal to your potential audience on the internet before you get to the festival. If you release a 20-minute trailer for your film, and I've seen this before, that's not going to be something any distributor is going to want or use, but it's never going to come down off the internet, because the internet lives eternally. So be careful with the materials you put out, because while any distributor at this table that picks up your film, myself included, is going to change everything you've done as far as poster, trailer, synopsis, website, we can't get rid of the old stuff, and it can influence what we think about your film. At least that's from a practical matter.
Well, and also on a marketing standpoint, it'll influence what kind of pickup you can get. One of the best ways to, just keep a film on the internet and, talking about it is to release a new image or an exclusive clip, months and months up to the release, and, you'll get better placement on these websites if it's an exclusive to them. It's something no one's ever seen before. So if you're saying there's a whole bunch of material already on the internet about this film, you're not giving them any exclusive, and that's going to affect, the level of publicity you're going to be able to generate.
Also, I don't know what stage you're in, but you should really think strategically about which festivals you want to go to. If you have a movie that you really think will break out, try to go to the big ones, like the South Bys, the Sundances, Toronto. Try to dream big. And then think about where the majority of people who go to the movies are. New York festivals, big cities, Chicago festivals. So try to be strategic about it.
I think I saw another hand, the gentleman in the...
I got here late. I don't know if anybody discussed Redbox. Is that a last resort or a good resort for a film?
It's very difficult to get into Redbox. I'm not sure that they take independent films directly from filmmakers. I doubt that there's a precedent.
I've done a couple films for a video company, and I know that what Redbox services to them, and it's a very desired place for a film to be, because A, they take very little, and B, when they do take your film, they instantly buy thousands of DVDs that count as DVD sales, which are very much down. So you should be so lucky to get your film into Redbox is sort of the way I look at it.
Definitely.
Yes, down here in the front.
I don't know if it's going to be an obvious question, but I never heard of pre-buying.
What do you teach?
I teach business law, covering publishing, and film.
The question is about pre-buying films for the audience, if you couldn't hear in the back.
I was just curious, how far in advance do you do this pre-buying? I mean, is it just there's only a script, or is there any footage at all that you get to see?
We bought a film actually during the American film market that had started shooting the day before we bought it. So there was no footage. But the script was really good. It was a very capable veteran director. I might as well pitch it. It's called Le Weekend, and it stars Jim Broadbent and an English actress who's not terribly well known here, but a very significant stage and television actress in the UK, Lindsay Duncan, and Jeff Goldblum is in a supporting role. The director is Roger Michell, Notting Hill, more recently Hyde Park on Hudson, and he's collaborating again with the novelist and screenwriter Hanif Kureishi, and they previously collaborated on Venus with Peter O'Toole and A Mother with Daniel Craig. So we had some reason to think that these guys could pull it off.
Okay.
So yeah.
And it has to be that kind of circumstance, right? Otherwise, it's really so risky, I would imagine.
It's I can't, I suppose you could envision a scenario where who's the guy that directed Clerks and is
Kevin Smith.
Kevin Smith shows up at Harvey Weinstein's office and hey, I got this script. It's about these guys who work in a convenience store or video store or whatever. I doubt, you probably get kicked out of the office, So on the independent level, you really got to show the finished goods, I think. The pre-buys really are predicated on people that have delivered in the past.
Okay. Thank you.
I actually have a pre-buy horror story if you want one.
Yes, please.
Those screenings can make your stomach go down.
We, with a video company, we picked up a Chinese film that Jackie Chan was the star of, and Jackie Chan directed. The script was this amazing, rousing, war movie, and when we got the film a week before release, because we released it the same day as China, and there was piracy issue, the Chinese government had gotten a hold of it, and there were these 3-page speeches about the glory of communism throughout the film. The war shit was gone. We released a communist propaganda film in the 50 AMC theaters. It can't go wrong.
It's not like, you hear the phrase, a screenplay is like a blueprint, but if architecture was like movies, a lot of buildings would fall over and fall down,
Yes, we're going to take the question right here. This woman in the picture. Yep.
I made an independent film, and I do have a foreign sales agent, and I have an American distributor, and it's on Chiller TV, and I'm so frustrated because it's been there for a year and they haven't done anything else.
Who's the distributor?
Osiris.
It's on Chiller?
It's on Chiller.
So
right.
they sold it to Chiller?
They sold it to Chiller, which is great.
What's the
but
title?
It's called The Sacred. And so it's great, but I ask them all the time, what about Netflix? What about streaming? So what could I do as a filmmaker? Because I've sold the rights for them for 7 years.
Hire an attorney.
Well, I don't want to go that route.
Make another film and kick the tires first next time. There's great distributors, and I think everyone at this table, I like to include myself, qualifies. And there are people who, frankly, I've never heard of Osiris, and that's probably not a good sign.
Well, they were the only ones paying in advance, so I had to take it.
That's the risk.
Yeah. But I know how we found Osiris, and it was difficult. it was difficult just to find them. How would a filmmaker find a distributor if they're not in the top tier film festivals? How do you acquire most of your films?
Do you have an agent? You have a foreign sales agent?
I do. And that's who found our American distributor.
The foreign sales agent should do their due diligence and contact all of the players and tell them and pitch the film to them. And then hopefully we'll be a part of those players. We should be a part of those players. And that's how they get the film to us.
Okay.
We have a question on the side over here. Okay.
Do you guys go to Tier 2 film festivals? Like Florida Film Festival to acquire films? Yeah.
We're here.
You come here every year to acquire films? Really?
No, this is my first time here.
Yeah, it's my first time. First time.
The big ones, the South by Berlin, Sundance, sometimes come.
Distributors came to this film festival, so I'm really surprised that you guys are here. I mean, I'm at ECU. I would like more distributors to come here, but
It's tough. You've got to stay home and do the work too. And it's very easy to I've got a month or two stretch every year where I'm gone 6 out of 8 weeks, which does not bode well when I have to go back and release a movie.
But I would imagine you want to go to film festivals where the movies premiere at the film festival as opposed to this festival. We have a few, I guess, but not a lot.
Nice weather is also good criteria.
Nice people too. I mean, come on.
There's probably a role for some kind of big, giant American independent market. I don't know where it would be or who organizes it, but most festivals are designed to, bring a mix of films and appeal to the local audience and, have a pretty good track record in delivering entertaining movies. There still is this thing called the, what is it in New York? The IFP runs it?
Film Week?
Yeah, I mean, there should be like a regional one where, there's video screening rooms and you can actually see a lot of, because I don't know about these guys, maybe they do a better job than we do, but it's not like we comb the festival world. I mean, yeah, we read reviews in Variety and Hollywood Reporter, and if it sounds interesting, we might follow up. But we generally go to the bigger festivals, and we use festivals as a kind of a winnowing process. There's just too many movies made, and there's no question that films get overlooked. We're going to do a deal on a movie called Old Goats. And Old Goats was made for about $10,000 by this guy who didn't go to film school. His father's a novelist, but that's about the only connection with the art world. And it was, I guess I saw it in Palm Springs. And it's these amateur actors, and it's kind of like a low-budget, grumpy old men. Have you seen it? Yeah. Anyway, I thought it was just funny, and somebody, I think IndieWire called it. It was senior mumblecore, which I don't know if you're reading the trades, but yeah. Anyway, it's this really lo-fi thing about these guys hanging out and eating oatmeal. Extremely important, yeah, yeah.
I'll add to that because I know this is really relevant to a lot of filmmakers in this room who, are not going to be getting into Sundance, but may have a really good film. We miss stuff. Like we're busy. Like I've got a stack of DVDs on my desk because we accept submissions after we talk to you and winnow down that. We accept DVD submissions. We picked a couple films off that. I've got 83 DVDs on my desk I counted before I left that I haven't seen yet. And if I spend the next month only watching movies, I'll get through them. Like we picked up a movie that is playing at this festival called The History of Future Folk. It debuted at Fantastic Fest, and I couldn't go last year because I had a wedding to go to, so I just didn't see it. And some critic tweeted at me like, "Hey, did you catch this?" I said, "No." They're like, well, you got to see it. We watch it, and it was one of those films you send an email to the company at 3 in the morning that says, "Holy shit," in the subject line. Like, it's so what you can do, regardless of whether we're at the festival or not, is establish yourself with some sort of internet presence and start building buzz amongst the people who would be interested in your film. You know, if you're at a regional festival, you should be hanging outside the door, getting email addresses of people who liked your film. Get them to go on your Facebook, get them to talk about your film, because we'll pick up on a film that's getting buzz even if we haven't seen it yet. It's just a matter of, it has to come from somewhere. Like, we have to be alerted to it in some fashion, whether it's seeing it at a festival or hearing about it from someone that, you know, we trust that said, hey, this is great.
Yeah, I mean, even with the festivals we can't physically be present at, you know, you take a look through the lineups, and, you know, we want to see the movie. Like, happily, if someone will send us a DVD, we're happy to screen if we can't physically be at, you know, the premiere at the festival where it may be. I mean, just can't travel all the time. It's just pragmatism.
We're going to take the question over here on the side now. I know she's been waiting patiently.
Thank you. My name's Nicole Weaver, and I'm an entertainment attorney. I actually have two completely different questions. One was, Amanda mentioned having a producer's rep or agent. I've actually had really bad experiences with people coming to me after, sort of like your situation, people coming to me after they've hired a producer's rep or an agent who's sold, you know, at least this many of the, you know, this much of the rights, and they've sold it to one particular group and have done absolutely nothing more. So I was wondering if you could maybe tell me a few producers reps that you actually trust and that have actually done some good for you. And then the second question is, what are you looking for when you select a film? Like, I know some of you are saying, you know, specific genres and that kind of thing. I've also been trying to encourage my clients to sort of develop a little bit of a marketing plan before they even go into filming, so that as they're going through, they can shoot some things that can help with marketing in the future, and they're not having to go back when maybe their actors look completely different, and that type of thing, or they have to now reset up lighting, et cetera, to be able to get shots that might have helped with marketing.
I think all of us at this table have a very different favorite film rep, but I think you know, and I'm sorry for your clients that have had to go through that. That is terrible. I've heard horror stories and of people who are taking rights away from filmmakers. But, you know, that's what you're there for, to help try to mediate the situation. In terms of New York, my favorite film agent, and I promise you, I didn't only work for him for 5 years, but he's a wonderful man, and the company is called Submarine. They're fabulous. Then I think other companies like Preferred Content, Traction, are good for smaller films. Of course, the big agencies. But sometimes independent films get lost. Little independent films get lost. Cinetic is in New York. That's my list. I don't know if anyone else has a list.
I think Visit should be on that list.
Visit, absolutely.
What about Peter Broderick or Stacey Parks?
Peter is more of an advisor, I think, but a good guy and
very nice.
And very responsible. I don't know, Stacey.
I think the second question, I'll just repeat it, was regarding whether filmmakers could do anything to develop a particular marketing plan in advance of devising their film that might help them through the process. Is that? Yeah.
If you're doing if it's an ensemble film, please get a photograph in focus of the ensemble.
An on-set still photographer, definitely.
And don't just have your like cousin or somebody, you know.
And none of those, like, it's great to get them pictures of you guys all with your arms around each other and like the cameras in the shot, but like, take some pictures of the actors acting so that when we have a review in the New York Times, we can say, yes, we have a picture for you. In focus. And gotta focus.
And some photos that look like it could be a poster at some point.
We will need one.
Yeah.
Please.
We have a question over there. Yes, sir.
My question is kind of about the food line. For distribution, I'm starting to hear different things about the kind of new trend of Kickstarter and Indiegogo, and kind of the residual effects of Kickstarter and Indiegogo for financing for the independent films, and the effects that has on distribution, because there's not necessarily any way to pay back the investors, or do distributors kind of shy away from that investing, or is it not even factored into?
I mean, if we're acquiring a finished film, it doesn't really affect us, except if like the award was every person who gave you $1 gets a free DVD, and you've already like given away, you know, so much of the people that are interested in seeing your film. for $1. But no, I mean, as a finished film, no. I mean, how you guys finance it, the financial needs, sort of are on your side. And as the distributor, we're here to work with you, but it's a lot of different ways.
There's one important thing, though, that Kickstarter does provide you that is useful for all of us, and useful for you is data. Like when you sell your film on iTunes, you're going to get a check, but you're not going to get an email address and a zip code of the person that bought your film. So when you go make another one, you're starting from scratch. When you Kickstarter gives you a mailing list of all the people who contributed to your film. I mean, if you only raise $10,000 for $1 a piece, yeah, please don't give the film away as a reward because that's going to limit your options. But now you've got the money to make your film, but almost as importantly, you've got 2,000 email addresses of people who are interested in the shit that you're making. That's huge because that gives you a starting point and something you can carry from film to film as you also work to not only make films but build your audience base as an independent filmmaker, which is becoming more and more and more critical, as this transitions into a lot of people doing it themselves. It's huge.
Just to piggyback on that,
Yep.
Very quickly, so most of the successful crowdsourcing campaigns that I see, the filmmakers are giving away copies of the DVD or whatever. Some of them are now saying, like, upon commercial release, i.e. when it is distribution. And I mean, how do you guys, Dylan just said don't give it away. You said don't give it away for $1. How do you feel about, like, if it's, $50 thing or whatever?
I don't think I've actually run into that specifically yet, but it's not going to be like a deal breaker if you have 100 people that deserve a DVD when it is commercially released. I mean, that's not going to be it's not going to kill the finances of any film necessarily.
If you're given 10,000 copies on demand the day the film is done, that's a deal breaker. But again, I haven't run into anything where it's more than like, we've got to give away about 212 DVDs. That's fine, do your thing.
Right.
Yes, sir.
I'll be loud. Spring Breakers, some people, I don't know if these are accurate, it was around $5 million or something. And I'm wondering if they did a deal possibly with the actors for a percentage of profit. Is that something you can do? Is that common where you keep the overall budget down, but you get a few name actors and say you can have X percentage of profit?
It's not really our expertise because that's more on the film financing side. The producers would, whatever they do. I honestly have no idea.
I specifically put in my deals with filmmakers like, we're going to give you a check, but if you have to pay your actors extra, if you have to pay music rights extra or bonuses, that's your shit, and we're not going to touch it because that's a slippery slope that we want nothing to do with if possible.
Here in the front, there's a question. Yeah. Please.
We're teachers, so we like to ask a lot of
questions.
Oh yeah.
It's killing me now.
So interesting, you said about if there are music rights attached to it. So it's like, for example, like a movie that might have had like a step deal with music in it, you wouldn't want to touch anything like that?
The question was about music rights and whether or not you would want to touch anything with it. I'm assuming if you mean that the music rights have not been fully cleared yet.
Right. Well, or if they have a...
Then we can't release it. If the music isn't cleared, we can't put it out. And as far as bonuses, like if the film gets a theatrical release, you have to pay Sony Records $50,000. We're going to put in the contract, at least we are, that it's up to you to pay Sony $50,000. So that's a point that you negotiate with us as part of the MG or whatever.
Okay. Thank you.
But if it's good enough and there's still music to clear, I mean, there are films that that only clear festival rights for music, and then the film is sold, and there has to be a decision. Well, do we pay for the full rights, or maybe do we replace it with other music? Usually, the music is so integral that you have to. So.
Yeah, and it's also good. It's also good for the distributor to know whether the music's been cleared just for the context of the film, or if you could use it in the trailer. A lot of times, especially with popular songs, they've got it for the movie, but we can't use it in the trailer. So that's a good thing just to think about as you're licensing.
Yes.
Is there such a thing as fair use of music in any form? Like a person just refers to a song, just
Perform the song, maybe hums it or something like that, makes a reference to it. I only bring it up because you were kind of on the topic.
There's a film called Putty Hill that's a fantastic film. It's a very small independent film by director Matt Porterfield. There's a big climax funeral scene where one of the characters is drunk, and I mean, this is a sort of pseudo-documentary, so he's actually drunk. He starts belting out the Rolling Stones' Wild Horses. And the release of the film was held up for months and months and months, and they ended up having to get all the actors together and reshoot the scene like a year afterwards because they just couldn't get a deal from the Rolling Stones. It's really difficult to play with that a lot of the time, and when you're a really small film and your budget might be a fraction of what would typically be a Rolling Stones license fee, you know, it's better not to have your characters hum a Rolling Stones song if you can help it. Like, you got to watch Happy Birthday is what I'm told a lot of the time, you know.
Yeah.
Just, you know, think you're an independent film, think independent, and try not to litter Radiohead in the background of, you know, 20 scenes in the film, because that is going to eventually be a potential issue. Whether you get around it or not is a question, but you don't want to make the release of your film subject to you cutting a deal for 10 Radiohead songs.
Yes, right over here in the middle.
This is back to like searching for films. If you can't get to all the festivals, is there like a dream situation where there could be a service for you guys where someone is like really looking for films in obscure places?
I'll repeat the question for the audience. What's the dream situation so that you can not have to travel out, or if you don't make it out to a festival, that it all comes to you?
Well, I have contemplated different scenarios, and digital streaming does offer some interesting possibilities, so that, you know, we would never have to leave our office or the couch at our home. But I think the festival phenomenon is really about people gathering, and so I think the festival as a model for premiering new films is really valid, even though not environmentally completely sound. I think that's going to continue. But were you asking whether you think there's a role for some sort of Well, this is, you know, another intermediary, and there are websites now. What is it?
There's
filmfestival.com or something.
Yeah.
Festival Scope, and they have streaming links to features. I'm not sure how the films get on there, and I don't know much about it really.
And I think a lot of what we're talking about is sales agents and producers, reps that, you know, collect these things. People we have relationships with that'll call and say like, "Hey, these films premiered in X, Y, and Z, and I really think you should watch them." And that's, you know, that does happen.
Any last questions? Well, on that note, let's thank our panelists for joining us this afternoon. And thank you all so much for coming down. Have a great day.